for the purpose of this conversation, I'm really interested in electro-acoustics, specifically the interaction between sound and electric fields, basically.
Me too.
Yeah,
it was a big subject of one of our talks not too long ago. Either we were talking about sound and piezoelectricity and like ancient monument type things, and so it is obviously a fascination, a link between the old and the new, and what did they know that we didn't, or what can we learn, that type of thing. Welcome to the August 14th edition of the Electric View. I'm Neil Thompson. Today we have Heather, Robert, Edwin, Buddy, Richard, Jim, and Dave with our wonderful guest, Eileen McKusick. She will be describing her work in human biofield tuning, and we will be discussing the electrical properties and mechanisms that seem to make this possible. Don't forget to like and subscribe. So, let's get right down to it then. I loved your talk, and I really liked the fact that when you were talking about discovering plasma and going down the plasma rabbit hole, as I'm pretty sure everyone could attest to at the conference and here, we've all done that. So it's nice to see that link and the desire to sort of bring it towards a new understanding of health and the body. It's just never been really touched. I don't think anyone has been. Perhaps there is someone else, as you said, like in your talk there, you're talking about people from the 1800s and the 1500s. But that's how far back you have to go to see this connection. How much divorce the whole the material world, so to speak, has, or the material worldview, the materialist worldview, I guess it is, to sort of separate things into very distinct parts and to not look at them. And obviously health is one of those things that requires a more wider view, so to speak. Yeah, definitely. Well, I think that back in the late 1800s or early 1900s, Tesla and that whole crew, there was a lot being explored about the electrical nature of health in our bodies. Yes. They came out with all kinds of devices back then, and I'm sure a number of them were probably dangerous. But there's been a real, I think, since the 40s, a real push towards chemical medicine and thinking of the body in chemical and mechanical terms, and the idea of a pill for every problem. And I think that this has been very intentional. That the pharmaceutical companies really dominate the health landscape. And if we're all thinking of our bodies in terms of solid and liquid and gas and chemical and mechanical, then drugs and surgery is, the logical place to go to treat ourselves. But, when you throw plasma into the mix and really start to understand that every aspect of our body is electrical. It's so funny to me when I talk to people about this, because all of the pieces are there, but nobody's really put them together. Everybody knows that when you get an EKG, it's measuring the electrical activity of your heart. That pacemakers treat the electric aspect of it. Everybody knows that your brain waves are electric, or that your blood carries a charge. That our bones. A lot of people know that our bones are piezoelectric, crystalline structures. So, we're mostly salt water, which also carries a charge. So all the pieces are there. It's just never really discussed as a whole. Right.
It's kind of this, it's this lock into this piece. One of the things that's just striking me here is this, you see these outgrowths that are so natural and, tree-like in a way, and how they map, the ganglia-esque kind of thing. And is your feeling that perhaps this modality or paradigm that we're in is something that was put upon us, or is it something that just naturally, organically occurred?
With regards to chemical medicine?
Yeah.
Business. I think big business drives the marketplace and education and
there's a lot of money to be made in pharmaceuticals.
Mm-hmm.
They can produce pills that cost them pennies to produce, and that they sell for thousands. I mean, that's a great business model, right? And how they've been able to really dominate medical schools and thinking and all that because of the power of that business model,
right?
So. And I do think, I don't want to be going into like conspiracy theory or that sort of thing, but there is a kind of divide and conquer kind of mentality, because one of the biggest things for me when I discovered EU and I started to really put all this together was recognizing that the same electricity that powered the sun and powered the stars powered my heart, and that it was all one electricity, it was all one field. And so that to me was a huge revelation about that ability to kind of take this yogic notion that all is one, but that did not fit into our standard cosmology, which is really one of separation. It's cold,
right.
It's separate.
Mechanical.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so, right. 100% behind you.
Yeah. So I think that, that there's a reason why we're not taught about plasma and that we're not taught about ether. And I think it goes back, thinking about Tesla. Well, why did we take Tesla out of the history books? Why has he been wiped, right? And that is economic. Like, that's purely economic because he wanted to harness the energy of the ether, of the plasma, and give everybody free energy.
Right.
And so we took ether out of our cosmology. And we took, Tesla out of our history books, kind of all at the same time. And I think it's very intentional, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's the message that I was personally waking up to. I just quick sketch. I worked in cardiology for 7 years, and the methodology I just found it was primitive and it was brutal, and it's ablation, pulmonary vein ablation. And it's like, what are you doing with this? You're actually going in and cauterizing the internal part of pulmonary artery in order to stop a signal from coming through. And it's like, this is just, I found it barbaric, actually.
Yeah, I find that's the word that often comes to mind for me when contemplating current medicine, is that it does seem very barbaric. And, we've been able to help a lot of things just around the pulmonary thing. I'm right near the airport, and there's jets going over the fighter jets, so I'm trying.
Oh, okay. I got construction going on outside, so don't worry about it. It happens.
I treated a gentleman who was supposed to get a stent because he had this pain in his heart, and he felt like his heart wasn't working, and so he'd gone to see a holistic cardiologist, and they, wanted to do a surgery right away. He was in a lot of pain, and he was like, well, no, I'm going to go see Eileen first. And so what I discovered was that, what was going on with his heart was very energetic, and I was able to correct it on the table. He went from being in an 8 of pain down to a 0 in an hour. It was completely gone, and the pain went away, and it never came back. And his surgeon was very angry at me.
Right, of course, yeah.
Yeah. So, here, that's the sort of thing, like of this invasive surgery, and yet I corrected it with using sound to manipulate the rhythm and the flow of the electric body. And that was what was out of whack. And that was very easily corrected. So, it's definitely kind of a threat to
right.
medical model. And there's a whole lot of jobs. I mean, this is a huge industry, looking at the body from this chemical mechanical perspective. And
it's the biggest. It is.
It's biggest. Yeah. So they want to stick to that model because it's working for them.
Sure. But then you get into the question is how do you effectively approach this and get this message out and protect yourself from from rocks and big bombs coming thrown at you.
Exactly. Or even just snarky comments on YouTube videos.
Yeah.
There you go.
I can relate to that. My fiance, like I said, who I got your book for, thank you, by the way, she's loving it.
she's a medical assistant, and she used to not really get into this side of the healing perspective until she started working for a chiropractor recently, who does something like AO scanning. Have you ever heard that? Heard of that?
Yes, I have heard of that.
What's your perspective on that?
I don't know enough about it. I've just sort of peripherally been aware of it, but I'm not enough to form an opinion.
Oh, because I thought it was kind of similar, because what she's told me and then what you've been saying, because you do it with tuning forks and sound. Basically, what they do is they set up a machine and they like run a frequency through you and then find out your deficiencies and everything and just tune it right back up with another frequency and set you on your way. And it works it has a lot of I guess people that really appreciate that. So I thought maybe wanted to hear if you were involved in that or
No, we're really low tech. I mean, a tuning fork is
right.
$50, and you can do a lot of really
right. I agree with that, because if the power ever to go out, your skill is definitely more needed. Like another event, which is what kind of like people are seeing now. You heard stuff going on, but that's beside the point.
Well, one of the things that I can't do with a tuning fork is collect data, and is to really quantify what's happening. And it's been something that I've been really frustrated about, because ever since I started working in the field, back in 2008, and discovering all of these different sounds going on and different feelings going on, I really wanted to create a technology that would show this. I wanted using a sonar-based field imaging system. I call it biofield sonography. But there's just a lot involved in collecting data. I was reading some of the comments on the Thunderbolts YouTube video. They posted my video a couple of days ago, and people are saying well, it should have been easy for her to have collected more data. And unfortunately, research is very hard. It's very expensive. It takes a long time. It brings up it's endless problems. There's endless troubleshooting that I've done so far. And it's not that simple. I'd be perfectly happy if all I had to do was be in a well-funded lab all day. I could come up with no end of documentation.
Well, that's one of our pipe dreams is to create something like that. Not that we're very far along the pathway, but it's like we would love to be part of that type of thing.
Yeah. Well, I do have something exciting coming up. When I was out on that smoker's patio at EU last August, because my husband is a smoker, so I kept on going out there with him. And I was sitting and I was listening, and all of a sudden I overheard somebody say, at specific frequencies, double layer membranes spontaneously arise. And I was like, that person is speaking my language.
Yeah.
And so I went over to introduce myself, and it turned out that it was Monty. What's my boy's last name? Yeah, Monty Childs. And so we started talking, and so we actually have a plan. I'm teaching in Toronto in September next month, and I'm going to go visit him, and he's got some devices that can measure frequency to the picosecond. So, I don't know what we're going to determine, but, my feeling is that if we could demonstrate with any kind of technology that there is, in fact, a double layer membrane at the outer boundary of the biofield, that goes a long way towards tying it into EU and supporting the idea that the information is stored in standing waves.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there is, just as a sheer fact, there is the skin, which is an insulator, more or less, and then you have, I believe there is that new organ, apparently the interstitial membrane, or whatever it's called. Yes, the
interstitium, exactly.
And that's surrounding. And of course, your body has multiple charged parts in it, not including just every single cell. Every cell is charged from its nucleus to the outer membrane by, I think it's 15 microvolts or something, or I'm not sure exactly how much. And then of course you have the fact that if you're attached to the ground and the charge is running over you, as it would, you would then have layers inside of your body going right down to each organ, probably. Each organ itself would have its own field around it, and react in certain ways, which probably helped it grow in the first place if you do the Rupert Sheldrake idea. And and you end up with the possibility then of having several, let's just say, more positive charges on the inside of your body in different locations, perhaps bones and marrow and so forth. I'm not exactly sure all the layers. And then of course your blood is charged. Your nerves are charged. They're powered from the electricity of the brain, so to speak. And all of that combined would give you, obviously a disbalance from the one side to the other. So the fact that there would be a voltage potential, so to speak, as we kept going, we should see steps where some layer is just more, is basically carrying a charge. You can go, okay, well, this is basically in chemistry, would be chemical double layer. That's what they call it in electrochemistry. But it doesn't really make any difference at the end of the day, because it's still even though it's sort of physical, there is still a barrier that has developed, and on each side of that barrier is a separate charge.
Right. Yeah, that model shows up everywhere. It's so practical.
And it makes you wonder about, of course, the ancient past, when people said, well, we could see the aurora, we could see perhaps maybe dragon lines through the sky and all these other weird things. What was life like then? And what could they possibly influence with sound? Because we were talking about the healing aspects of the ancients and how they involve sound. Rumors, of course, stories, anecdotes.
Pretty convincing evidence.
Pretty convincing, though, in some cases, yes. It does definitely seem that way.
Speaking of dragons and that kind of idea of like the electricity, are you familiar with DDS therapy?
What does that stand for?
I'm trying to find exactly what it stands for, but it's a bioelectric energy in our body through the meridian, and there's a machine that they stand on barefoot on top of a wet washcloth, and the charge goes through their body, out of their hands into you. So it's a combination of massage, pressure points, electrical current flows through you into your pressure points, and then releases that pent up energy in certain spots. Like what they do first is a meridian test to see where your blockages are. And if you've ever been to traditional Chinese medicine, they'll check your meridian lines to find out where they need to put the acupuncture needles and find out where your blockages are, where you have. So they give you a diagnostic first through that means, and then they know how to address you physically, like when they're massaging you. And then I asked her, I was like, how does that affect you? Because you're not supposed to take a shower for 2 hours, and you're supposed to stay out of the water and all this. And I'm like, how does? Yeah. She goes, it doesn't stay in me; it goes in you. She's like, yeah, I'm fine. It comes right out of me, but it stays inside the person. That the extra charge stays inside the person that they're massaging. So that's why you have to be careful with yourself for the next few hours until that charge dissipates fully. I've had it done several times, and it's amazing. I'll put a link into the box for you for a lady who does it. Her name is Alice Wong.
Yeah, it sounds like it's the same idea as biofield tuning, where we determine where the blocks are, and then we add energy in order to get them to release. In this case, we're using the mechanical energy of a vibrating tuning fork, which I think also produces an electromagnetic charge as well. So, it's a similar principle. Basically our bodies are either in a state of flow and sufficient voltage, or they're all gummed up and losing voltage. What's different about biofield tuning is that we work in the field, and we release the charge, not the areas of congestion from the field, because that's the blueprint of the body. So, even if there's a block in the physiology and you release it from the physiology, but it's still in the blueprint, then it's just going to reassert itself.
Right, but that also might be a good means for your data collection, because through this method, they can see your electrical. I mean, they're meridians. They can see all of the lines that go from place to place, your nerves through your hands, and they put different things on your arms, electrodes, to find out how they're responding in different places, and then you get a printout of your physiology. So just for your data collection, maybe that might be something that might help you.
Well, there's quite a number of devices like that on my wish list for my lab. We did actually buy a heart rate variability monitor system, and we're going to be implementing that. We just opened a new clinic, and we're going to be doing 3 sessions for veterans, but with the caveat that they have to submit to having their heart rate variability tested before and after. So we will be collecting some data like that. But yeah, I mean, my regular prayer is, to be able to create a lab where we've got all kinds of devices like that. And because I'm going to cross-check them against each other too. I want to take data with 8 or 9 different machines and see what are they all showing us, and and then from there kind of ferment the ability to create our own device that really approximates what the tuning forks do, but in a way that makes it visible. In a way that provides. I mean, I feel the need to see if it's possible to provide irrefutable evidence that we have a field, so that people can't really argue with. So,
how do you sense it? I've seen your descriptions of it, but it'd be nice, like one-on-one, just as a query. The tuning fork itself, and then your read of the tuning fork. Could you describe that to us?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's a language. Like, basically, what I found is that everything in the body is in motion, and everything in motion makes waves. And if a system is solid and healthy, it produces coherent waves. And if it's unbalanced in some way, it's going to produce incoherent waves. So for example, I've learned that if somebody has arthritis in a joint, that when I ping that joint with sound and I listen to the signal that comes back, I hear a green quality, and that lets me know that there's arthritis in there. And it's the same with emotions. I mean, recently we just opened a new clinic this past weekend, and I did some sessions. I don't really do sessions anymore because I'm so busy traveling and teaching and just managing the business selling tuning forks. And so I haven't done one in a while. And I was able to put a weighted tuning fork on a person's sternum and just feel into the vibration. And I was able to tell him, just by that feeling, that he had a traumatic birth where I said you were flopping around and fighting like a marlin on a line. And he confirmed that he had been pulled out with forceps and that it had been a really big struggle.
Right.
And so that experience of his first experience of life is, something grabbing onto his head and yanking him out and him first crashing around.
Wow.
And
so you just intuit that then?
No, it's not. I don't like the word intuitive. I don't use the word intuitive, and I encourage my practitioners to not use the word intuit.
Okay.
When a doctor puts a stethoscope on a body for the first time, do they have any idea what they're encountering? No. Right?
No,
I mean,
no.
it comes with context.
Right.
That the more chests you listen to, the more breathing you listen to, the more you put together that sound means this, right?
Right.
And so for me, it's the context of 22 years of listening to the body's vibrations and drilling down into the very subtle aspects, but knowing what that language is.
Right.
So it isn't necessarily intuition. And, the thing is that we all vibrate in the same language. So when I was mapping the biofield and I was discovering, wow, I keep finding sad stories off the left side of the left shoulder, that sad, like when you hear the music from Jaws, is that your intuition that's telling you it's scary?
Right. Well, this gets into the resonances, and then the intervals, where they'll be, like, I don't know, I'm sure you're familiar with this, I don't know, but a tritone, the dissonance of a tritone versus an octave, to get basic, those kind of things.
We naturally know harmony when we hear it. We naturally know it. We naturally know fear when we perceive it. It's just a knowing. It's not even, we don't want to say it's intuitive. It's not, when you hear sad music, it's not intuitive.
That's all interesting. Sorry, Heather, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I would like to listen to what you have to say because I'm having a really hard time understanding how that's not intuition.
Well, I was
so I need that explained better to me because you are perfectly describing intuition, and the left side is the feminine side, which is the intuitive side. So that's all falling into place again with it. So how is that not intuition?
Yeah, the trouble with the word intuition to me is kind of like the trouble with the word quantum, and that is that if I were to ask everyone on this call to define intuition, we're going to hear a whole bunch of different definitions.
Right.
That's the problem that I have, because there's intuition. You could say it's intuition that comes from, you don't have to consciously think about it, but that information is already in your database.
Right.
And it's just coming up from some deep place.
Deep.
Right? Or is it something that is just dropping into you from like people who channel? I don't have any connection to this information. It's just dropping in and I am putting it out there, right? Because that could be intuition as well.
So just to support what you're saying, like if you think of music and intervals, people are going to have a fairly common response to a dissonant interval versus a consonant interval.
Yeah, and that's not an intuitive process. That's sensory.
Right.
It's just
right. Yes. Yeah.
So, if I may put in a question there. The left side and the right side of the brain are totally different, functioning different, right? On a pretty fundamental level. From one side is more the intellect and the ratio, the other side is more the feeling and the intuition, for example, regardless of exactly what definition it is. Do you, in your work, Eileen, pick up on those differences? So the left and the right side, how different they are, and can you relate to those differences of the right and the left side of the hemisphere of the brain?
Sure. So, one of the things that I've heard is that more current research has been disproving that notion that, the right side of the brain is predominantly, spatial, and the left side of the brain is predominantly logical. I haven't done enough kind of diving into that to be able to speak about that new research, but
it is its own rabbit hole.
Yeah, exactly. What I find is that we definitely see a difference in the hemispheres. So I find that the right side of the body, right, which is controlled by the left side of the brain, is more outgoing. It's more yang. It's more masculine. It's more active. It's more future oriented. It's more hot. Whereas the left side of the body, which is controlled by the right side of the brain, is more inward, it's more feminine, it's more wet, it's more related to the past. So I would divide it really more into the traditional expressions of yin and yang than what we say about, the logical versus the spatial or the intuitive. I don't see that so much in working on the sides of the head.
Maybe not in the terms that I used, but what the terms that you used just there are more or less, confirming that difference between the two sides, right?
Yeah. There's definitely a difference, for sure.
Okay.
And what I find with people, just from the perspective of a body worker, is that most people's right side of their body is kind of like overamped, and it's just kind of overdoing and overthinking, and it's sort of dragging their tired left side along behind them.
I'd like to talk about that because it's kind of interesting because while you were doing a demonstration in the breakout room last year, I think where everybody was like walking, it was right in front of my exhibit, and the woman that you were doing it to, we were both opposing on our left sides, and she was experiencing like some bad thing and started tearing up. Well, I kind of like owned just to see if there was like anything, if I could like amplify my field and see if there was anything to it. And I instantly started feeling like this feeling of gloom, and then I started feeling like I was doing something unethical, so I just stopped. But it was interesting that you just mentioned that, because that kind of leads me into my next question, because I had for you, because it was it's like, have you ever noticed anything while you were practicing on people like that you were like close to, like any kind of empathic concerns?
Can you elaborate on that? Just a little, you mean like my own feelings of resonance with whatever's going on with them?
Like, say if like there was an instance that you've experienced with somebody like that was close to you, that where it's a similar situation where you both experienced, did you like feel the same thing at the same time, or something similar?
Well, yeah, I mean, part of doing this work is that we become highly empathic. And because when I'm holding the tuning fork in a traumatic memory, for example, let's say something that was just incredibly sad, the tuning fork is broadcasting that information. It's amplifying that information. And so my own cell membranes, the little antennas on my cell membranes that are picking up on vibrations, are suddenly being informed by that information. And so I am going to feel really sad. It just happens. Or I'm gonna notice that I've stopped breathing because this is you just had an accident or something and there's no breath. And, so we're constantly being jerked around by the information in our client. And that's part of what makes this challenging. And, you got to be ready to have your heart broken open because you're in people's stuff. It's not like they're sitting there talking about what's going on. You are feeling the vibration of that experience, and it can be very heavy duty. But we have a method to deal with that. I mean, basically what we do is we recognize that our own vagus nerve is tightening up and our breath is being held, and we breathe deeply into our bellies, and we exhale forcefully out our mouth, and we discharge the energy down into the ground. So that we're receiving the information, we're resonating with the information, we're getting insight into that person's story, we're witnessing it with them and for them. And that ability to be very present in somebody else's suffering is a big part of what is, makes the therapy helpful. Because we all want and need to be seen and heard, especially in these kinds of trauma. So yeah, but we just let it go, and we become good at letting it go. And that's something that can take some time for people to learn. They tend to go home and they're like, oh shoot, I brought other people's energy home with me. But if you learn to, and honestly, just learning to breathe into your belly and have you exhale out your tailbone or exhale down at your legs and feet, is a way to really just handle anybody's bad vibes, because we're all having the experience all the time of being subjected to other people's vibes. Maybe not in this intense therapeutic setting, but certainly, if you're an idiot on the road and you do something stupid and then you have to deal with the anger of the person flipping you off, you're catching that vibe of anger. You're feeling that in your body. Somebody just threw you a vibe and you caught it, right? Yeah. It's not so different.
When you do the with the tuning forks, I'm sure you've done some signal analysis. I'll just touch on this. I'd like to go down it, but it may be too deep a rabbit hole. But I know with voice recognition and like analysis of the signal, and then breaking up Fourier series, and then the formant, like I think they're called, like for getting the envelope of the frequency response of anything. Is that a direction that you're going with trying to?
Yeah, believe me, I've been wanting to do frequency analysis for a long time. It's complicated. It isn't, it's not as easy as you want it to be. And one of the things that I found when I've gone into recording studios in order to, be able to analyze the waveform, recording studios are constructed to take the noise out of the signal.
Right. The anechoic.
And so it doesn't work going into a recording studio because those spaces, what we're looking for is the noise. Uh-huh. You're looking for the places where you hear that sharp tone of alarm or the undertone of depression or the pulsing quality of fear that you can hear in a treatment room. But the moment you go into a recording studio, that stuff all gets dampened out. Mm-hmm. So it's custom.
It's the opposite. It's the opposite of what you want.
Exactly, it's the opposite of what we want. We want to have the noise be amplified.
Right.
So that's part of just what makes this complex.
Yeah, no, really interesting. Because when you ring the tuning fork, you're listening to the overtones, right?
Yeah,
listening to the overtones. You're listening to the dissonance in that overtone.
And you're sending
right.
you're sending that signal
like a church bell kind of thing, right?
Yep.
Had all those, and all those interesting things they were playing around with, to be profound back.
So it's kind of like basically, just knowing the type of room you're in the dark by simply hearing, your own footsteps. Like as you walk or shuffle along the floor of the dark, you can I can tell there's a wall over there. I can just hear it. I can hear something over here. It's not as much as it's not intuition. It's intuitively understanding, perhaps maybe understanding what this means, because you are aware of it. You've experienced it over and over again, as you said, just like a mechanic, as you said.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. I mean, if a mechanic is getting in your car and telling you that it's your left CV boot that's making noise, it's not his intuition.
Right. Right. Right.
It's his experience and exposure that is allowing him to make that. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, there is definitely an element where some people can hear a noise and just really. I'm thinking about one time. I was working on a woman, and I was in her father zone. And I was around 16, I was getting, and then her whole relationship with her dad went downhill at 16. I was reading this in her field. And on that particular day, I was very right on, and I said, is your dad teaching you how to drive a standard, and you couldn't do it, and he ended up being really disappointed in you, and your relationship went south from there? And she was like, oh my God. How did you know that?
Nailed it.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I nailed it. Now, was that intuition? I guess. I mean, it was certainly. It might have been logical too. I don't know.
So do you get a visualization of it when you're doing a reading?
Some things come in visually. Some things come in just on pure sensory sense. Some things come in what I call my mail slot, which is MAIL. It's like having this little portal in the back of my head, just below the oxygen bridge.
And
there'd be a sense.
Immediate ring.
Yeah. And so sometimes there's a sense that there's like a little, mailbox there, but a door, and it opens and a note drops in. And, and I'll be like, okay, this is this. So there's a lot of different ways. It's just, it's not as simple as saying this is intuition or this is logic or this is experience. It's more complex than that.
Right. Really cool. Yeah.
It's actually really interesting you brought that up about the other man, because I've never heard anyone else that had that same problem of having a difficult birth like that. But that happened to me, so that was very weird.
Yeah. I'll tell you what. I mean, one of my big discoveries is coming to understand why the baby boomers have driven the self-help movement. And what I've found is that these children, they were experimenting with anesthetics to knock women out. They were knocking women out really hard, and then they were pulling babies out with forceps. And I mean, there was a lot of forceps deliveries, or really difficult deliveries, or overdrug deliveries. And then the babies were separated from the mother. And then there was this whole belief that you had to bottle feed on a schedule.
Yeah.
So imagine a baby that's been pulled out with forceps, separated from mom, and then not given a breast, and not given food when it's hungry, but given a bottle of muck on a schedule and left to cry it out over and over again. This is violent and horrible treatment of children, and it set baby boomers up for lifetime patterns of all kinds of dysfunction.
Right. Well, this was the deification of the modern quote unquote world, straight out of Madison Avenue.
Yeah,
I think it also led to the obesity of the children simply because it took away the cannabinoids that are naturally in mother's milk, which would have spiked, like giving the baby the munchies as opposed to being triggered by sugar.
Yes,
this is what they eat everywhere.
Yeah, so, the sugar addiction is very easy to see. I mean, a lot of babies were given condensed milk with Caro syrup in it. And that sets you up for a lifetime of sugar addiction and diabetes and all kinds of crazy stuff like that.
And here we are.
So, yes. So,
baby boomers are always really relieved to hear that it's like really not their fault. Like you were just set up for this from bad birthing practices and bad parenting. Yeah.
Right.
And I never would have been able to see that, if I didn't have this curious practice of reading the record of people's lives and, reading the vibration of the quality of that birth, reading the vibration of the baby crying it out because, it's still 2 more hours till feeding time, and then seeing continuity of that. I'm speaking and I'm not being heard. Nobody cares what I have to say. I'm frustrated over my unmet needs. I'm not bonding well with other people. I mean, there's just no end of patterns that got created. So we're much more influenced by our birth in those first 3 years than we realize. And we're much more influenced by our ancestors and the tonal experiences of our ancestors and what we inherit, the tonal qualities of our DNA, which is just a musical composition. Yeah. And when you look at the last few generations of what people have been through on planet Earth, there's been some really non-beneficial inputs, right? Yeah, and there's a lot of studies that have shown that, like, children of Holocaust survivors tend to have anxiety, depression, blah, 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 even if they had a wonderful life. Even if their parents went out of their way to create a beautiful, wonderful, safe life for them, they're still feeling in their bodies the discomfort that their ancestors went through.
Did you hear that? I just heard that. That's Velikovsky. He's clapping. He appreciates this right there because that's exactly what he's talking about. There's some sort of memory that was very traumatic in our past and affected the entire world. Obviously, catastrophes and stuff like that. And you don't have to go back very far before you, even during my time, the Chicken Little stories were still there. So, screaming at the sky, worrying about the end of the world. And they didn't have televisions to tell them, movies to show them all the time. I mean, it was still happening, though.
Yeah, but it's really interesting, too, though. You guys used that word earlier, barbaric, and I've been kind of thinking about that because I also sent Ito an email earlier in reference to runes that came to mind intuitively, maybe, probably. I'm going to go, yeah. So, through Thuri Swaz, okay, I don't know how to say it, I always call it Thur Swaz because it's Thor's rune, and it's the gateway, and it's the place where we stand still before we go on to the next space. We look at what we've done in the past and where we're leaving, and then we go on to the next thing. The next thing is the Degas, the breakthrough. It's named after Thor, and Thor is also the god of the electromagnetism, like the whole of the earth, like the god of thunder, right, and lightning. And that electromagnetism is what gives each living thing its ability to have its own electromagnetism, its own life force. So I think that it's probably in us, programmed in us, yes, from deep within our ancestry, and we're able to bring these things out. Maybe always felt them, but now we can see them, this gateway, like looking back and then moving on to the next thing through these occurrences and through the energy that's passed from generation to generation to generation. Because I'll tell you, I feel that. I feel my great grandma did the starvation march in Armenia during the Armenian genocide, and she made it through. But I feel that my other grandma was also a very, very angry person, and my entire family. We talk about that. We carry those things with us, and it's that gateway through, that ability to stand where you are now and like look at what you saw, where everything came from, take what you need, leave the rest, and move on. And that's that changing of the charge. And the Degas is then the Z pinch, right? It's the 2, it's the 10, the 5 and the 5, where they go together. So I would say that, and not in any derogatory sense, but in a real sense, like that it's more barbaric because the runes are Germanic, right? They're from Northern Europe, as ancient, as the ancient alphabet of Northern Europe that is said to have been given to them from the sky god. Odin was given the rune. He hung from the Yggdrasil tree and was given the runes, which are electromagnetic shapes, electric shapes, plasma forms that make specific sounds that we associate with, and we use those symbols to make those sounds. And then now here's Suraz, and here it is. This, I think it's very barbaric, and I think that's very beautiful, and I think that that's where the healing is going to come from within all of us, and to be able to you want to use the word quantify it, right? To put a number on it and to calculate it, and to be able to do that is like what you're doing is so important, because it takes. At first, I was getting a little frustrated because I'm like, okay, well, what you're doing is very intuitive, and it's very like all of these things that I'm like, please embrace this. And my heart, I'm feeling like thunder light, please embrace this, because it's all what it is. But at the same time, what you're doing is it's the logical, it's the scientific, it's the, like, I don't want to say quote rational or whatever, but the collection of the data to show people who have a hard time understanding or accepting the intuition, these feelings that we get naturally, and say, there is a reason for this, and there is a way to fix this, and it's not impossible. You don't have to live your life like this for the next generation. You don't have to pass it on to the next generation. And these things that the ancients knew about their energy fields and about how everything was connected, and those sounds that they make. And it also goes, I mean, everything's in the sound, right? We go back to the Dogon conversation. We'll talk about that later, but it's all very, very, very much related. And I feel like there's a synthesis between the understanding. It's like not new age hokey pokey. What people are really feeling is what they're really feeling, and you're showing them that and how to heal it. And if that's barbaric, it's absolutely beautiful.
This is where this illustration is so powerful. I mean, this is what keeps ringing on my eyes. But we've been looking at Lichtenberg patterns, and we see them all the time in our veins, and we're all fans of Alex Gray, etc. But this diagram for me has like a bridge to it, and it's like you see because of the nature of the different spatial distribution of these veins coming out of each of these areas, and how tree-ish each of them is, and then if you start thinking of them as I'm sure we all have in a way, but as antennae to fields, I just have to thank you, for having this up here, because this one certainly has quite a bit of just in a mirrory way a resonance for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's just like Sheldrake. He found an effect and he couldn't find the cause. He knew it was there. He can prove it scientifically by basically doing experiment after experiment. After 20,000 experiments, if your odds are this, then you're more than guessing. There's more to it than that. There's something substantial. It's just like, I'm sure that someone was saying, well, is this just the placebo effect? Is this just another effect or anything like that? But obviously there's, you're getting results that you can hear. And obviously just by hearing what you do, hearing how you do it, and of course noting the electromagnetic nature of certain parts of our body, and which we don't even fully understand yet, puts, I mean, as an engineer, that's my thing. I want to know exactly what's happening. I want to build a machine that could do what your brain does if I can. You can interpret.
I want to do that too.
No, I know
badly.
That's the goal, right?
You do?
I mean, well, if it separates.
Yeah, that's all I want to do for years. I want to build a machine. No, well, what happened was I ended up with this group of scientists in San Diego. And I, was like, I want to build a machine. And they were like, well, before we build a machine, we really have to test the hypothesis. We have to know that there's a there before we go putting money together to build a machine. And so we spent the last years putting together a study where we were testing, will 3 different practitioners find the same areas of resistance and turbulence in the field of, volunteers. And trying to coordinate, the schedules of 6 people. And, it's just been going on and on. All I wanted to do was build a machine. And now I'm spent 2 years bogged down in a freaking study.
Oh, it's awful. Yeah. I have to share something just really quickly. It's like, I did a radical thing, and it's like I jumped out of this business, which was fairly, could have had my life, etc. But I couldn't tolerate it from a soul standpoint. So I started a business, and it's like I'm not doing a business plan, and I'm not saying what the business is about. I'm just going to start building it, and it's like, and in the doing, it told me what to do. It was very like going like, the story about the Terrence McKenna tells it, where they found ayahuasca because they listened to the plants, kind of thing. Yeah. It's like, this has been my pathway, and it's been really interesting because it actually worked, and it's absolutely anti the way the establishment demands that you do this type of thing. So I just wanted to share that, but it's like I'm not going to, not that I put this name and it's my tagging of the name, but it works. It's like organic development. You find it in the doing and in the building. That's where you hear it, and it's not in imagining it. It's in doing it.
Yeah, well, I would love to be doing the building of a machine, but it requires a team. It requires resources. It requires the right timing.
Mm-hmm.
There's
really, but it's it's also commitment and faith, and then intention. It's all those
well, believe me,
virtues that are very amorphous. Right, obviously.
That's been insufficient. So,
but that's the test. That
right.
ends up being the test.
How
courageous
happy, if any of you have thoughts about that, about, well, how can we do more research? How can we, try to pull up a little more objective evidence, of this field around the body, of these frequency patterns that the body emits, of the double layer membrane. I'm open to receiving any kind of help on this, because I feel like it's of the essence. It's an absolute necessity. And, and for me alone, trying to do this, and we teach all over the world. I've trained over 1,200 students so far in small classes, and we have such a huge demand for our classes. If you go on my website to the class page, you'll see every class is full with a waiting list. And that's a big part of why I haven't been able to commit to more research, is that I have a huge demand for my teaching. And it doesn't, I train teachers and they're teaching, and we're still completely, underserving the market.
You're going to find a lot of love. Sorry. You're going to find a lot of love when you go to Toronto, in that area, I'm sure. In fact, I recommend you probably look up some doctors that are working in a similar area as you. Maybe not in biofield tuning, but in there's a big push up here to do exactly what you were talking about removing the pills, treating the body holistically as a whole organism. Maybe not with holistic medicine, but I mean as a whole thing. Basically, the way your doctor is going to try to get you healthier up here is to get you healthier. They're not going to give you a pill to solve your problem necessarily. I mean, obviously people need pills. It's going to happen. But I mean, in the general, there is if you don't need them, we're going to try to do it without them if we can. If you need them, you need them, and that, I mean, they're not going to throw away something that works or risk people's lives. Obviously, that's not the goal here. The goal is to, obviously have you not go to the doctor as much at the end of the day, really, be healthier. And I think that you'd find a lot of kindred spirits up in this area.
Well, I am drawn to Toronto. I was just up there a little while ago, and I did a lecture. And I think we're going to do that again when I come back at the end of September. I'll be doing a free lecture on a Thursday night before my class. So, so if you want to bring anybody to that, just pop me an email, and I'll just make sure you get the information about it.
Well, yeah, actually, that would. I mean, I'm only 17 hours from Toronto, so. Well, I was born. I was born there, so So, but yeah, it's.
Yeah, it definitely feels like it has a pretty progressive vibe there.
Well, they have some of the best heart surgery places up there in Toronto itself. But anyway, go ahead, Richard. Sorry.
Okay. Well, I was just, the thing about being able to record things which I think is one of the big issues you brought up in your work. So I did a Google search on aura imaging, and like evidently there's cameras that can show you your, aura and all that.
Kirlian photography, I think it's called, isn't it?
Yeah,
something like that. Yeah, I mean, you probably.
Yeah.
So, would that be something like you could be snapping pictures as you go along, or something?
Yeah, I mean, yes. Kirlian photography is one of the ones that we'd like to have. There's a machine called a BioWell. I mean, I've already done a bunch of work with stuff like this. I've used aura photography before and after. I've used biowells and biophoton counters and medical thermal imaging, and I have a bunch of data from those kinds of things. But they're just little bits here and there. They're not any kind of extended comparison or anything like that because I just haven't had the time and the resources to just do all of that. I mean, I'm familiar with what's out there, and we've definitely done some, but there's way more to do.
Yeah, I could imagine. I'm just
really exciting field.
I'm just trying to think about what you would need to pull off that alone. I mean, you'd want to record on a sizable amount of frequencies. You're going to need different transducers. You're going to want to record outside the range of human hearing. You're going to want to be able to analyze tones. The closest thing that even and of course, the electromagnetism of human body. The closest thing I can think of, just off the top of my head, is those people who use, take the Wi-Fi signals in a building, for example, and because of the body absorbs Wi-Fi signals and blocks them, you can use that to map out where someone is in a building. So you can see a person moving along because they are absorbing the frequencies, and therefore you're doing sort of an analysis of the frequencies and the sound, or, well, in this case, not sound, but by Wi-Fi. But at the same token, I don't see a reason why that type of technology, where you can sort of get an entire 3D idea of a sound wave or waves interfering, would probably be beneficial. But as you said, that's almost building your own little project. It would be challenging right off the get-go, especially without knowledge of what you're trying to measure, considering you're using sound, but you understand that you're influencing electromagnetism. How is that process going? Is it just piezoelectric? Is there more to it? How do the nerves interact? What does this all mean? And you're right. You're stepping into almost interpretive nightmare, trying to figure that out.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's much more complex than people realize. People say, "Why don't you just cut the data?" I'm like, you don't get it. Like, if it was that easy, I would have done it already. Right. It's complicated. Expensive. It requires very knowledgeable people and very specialized equipment. And you have to know what you're looking for. You'd have to almost construct a space. I mean, it's complicated.
I think ultimately the one thing that's kind of the heralding call of this is this is a massive paradigm shift, and it's out of as Rupert Sheldrake says, it's breaking the chains of philosophical materialism.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, that's part of why I've had such a strong desire to do it. If biofield sonography can actually visualize the terrain of the field, then all of a sudden, that's a paradigm shift, that consciousness is not just in your brain. Consciousness is outside of your body. And if you are outside of your body, where do you end?
That's actually a really good point.
And then everyone else begin, and then is there and then what is this identity Descartesian breakdown, res extensa versus res cognizans, etc. That definition given as just that's fundamentally true, and you start questioning that fundamental, it's a whole new horse race.
Yes, it is.
And I bet you, just like we were talking just the other day, Dave, or I can imagine, and of course it also has to do with what planet you're on, because the planet itself has its own vibrations, and you're part of it. And apparently, and I don't know if this is anecdotal or not, but apparently there has been instances where people have been separated, deliberately isolated from the Earth, electromagnetically in a Faraday cage and under the ground and so forth. And things, the human body falls out of whack. your rhythm.
It does. Yeah.
I mean, we really like whatever the Earth does. We like it. Like we want to be part of it.
We're being part of. It's part of an entire massive living system that we're an element of. Like a cell is part of your body.
Yeah.
And it makes you question, of course, just talking on this level alone, what are we really absorbing? How much energy are we getting from our environment over and above our caloric intake? We were talking about this with Phil just on the other call, me and Robert, and I said something along the lines of, if you're like all the same chemicals are happening between in your brain, the chemicals are moving and causing, your dendrites are sending, receptors or GABA receptors or signal. I'm not sure exactly what's going on, but there's a gap there and a synaptic gap, and then there's chemicals going back and forth, transferring charge, so to speak. And then I said, and then you're dead. You're dead, but all the same chemicals are there. Why does it stop? Why does all this? I mean, there has to be more of a driving force than just the ongoing chemical reaction that your body makes. But it's not just an organ failure. There's even more to it than that. There seems to be some sort of. I think other people have pointed out that some people, like athletes, for example, are technically seem to be burning more calories than they're taking in. How? Is it, are unhealthy people having to eat more to compensate? These type of ideas pop into your head because, again, we're all connected. We're on the same planet.
Prana.
Was that what it was?
Prana.
Robert?
It's prana.
Okay. I'm speculating. I don't really know much about all this. I just read some interesting articles one time. Obviously, you guys are the experts.
We've been in touch with John Reed, and this study of cymatics has been very fascinating for us, of course. I think there is at least a 2 degree of Kevin Bacon connection with your work, with what's going on with the formation
I just paid him to send me a 25-minute video clip of a specific frequency, what it's sounding.
Oh, cool! Oh, wow! Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Nice. Yeah. Nice. He's amazing. He's really.
He is amazing. Yeah. In fact, I've got a whole bunch more frequencies that I want to see as well. Uh-huh. So. Yeah, it's, the same thing.
This tie-in. The one thing that, as far as like kind of different perspectives on things that I've heard that's interesting is thinking of things instead of like, okay, this is sound, and then this part of the electromagnetic spectrum is light, and then this is infrared. It's like if you think of it as the entire thing is one continuum, including sound as pressure mediation, and then all the morphic formation, the formation of things out of either a consonant, harmonious, proportional, resonance versus a discordant, and then you start seeing the forms come up, and then how you respond to like what's beauty and what's ugly, all these things. That's coming out to me.
Go ahead, buddy. Go.
That's what I was curious about. I was wondering if you visualize any of this information that you channel from your tuning forks. If there's any type of thing that you see, or if it's more of an emotive type of thing, or because it's kind of like spikes, sound. It's like helical as it moves back and forth, I would envision. But I guess you said earlier, it's like, it is sound. So whether it's like got more texture to it, if you could go more into that, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, it does have a kind of texture, and there's all kinds of different consistencies. Sometimes I encounter something that feels overwrought, like motor oil that should have been changed thousands of miles ago. Or might have a tendency to perseverate and run energy kind of neurotically through a particular area of their field. So they'll actually wear down the plasma. If you're dealing with certain emotions, like sometimes in the anger zone, it can feel like lava. There's definitely a consistency to the bioplasmic medium that is very as varied as the tonal expression as well. So there's a whole terrain of stuff there. There's a whole atmosphere of density and vibrational quality, and it's not as hard to connect with and to perceive and to work with as people think. A lot of times when I teach a class, people are like, they're afraid they're not going to feel it, they're not going to know it's out. And everybody can. When you come in contact with the hypothetical double layer membrane, the fork vibrates more. It's very distinct. So the idea is that there's more energy present, and that additional energy boosts the amplitude of the fork. And so it becomes louder, and it vibrates more, and you can feel that very distinctly in your fingertips.
Don't you say that some of your patients actually feel lighter?
Everybody says they feel lighter. And that's what makes me feel like we're working with light, because the idea is that these areas of resistance are like frozen light. And what we do is we get them unstuck, unfrozen, and then sort of coax it back into the system and back into circulation. And you can see it in people. I mean, they look lighter. They feel lighter. Their eyes are brighter. Their face has more light in it. It's very, very, very evident. It's not subtle.
Wow.
It's funny you say that, because that's kind of like what that AO scan that I mentioned kind of does. So it would be weird if you both tune both into those. It'd be almost like tuning the body within and without, with sound and light.
Good combo.
It's probably it's probably very similar to the same thing. I mean, obviously, the idea of listening to the body is time honored in the range of stethoscopes. So to influence the body, to understand perhaps maybe piezoelectric nature and what happens when you vibrate these boundaries, and what information could you glean. This is all. I mean, heck, I know what you're talking about right there, because humans are amazing on our ability to say things, like you said, like it felt like lava, or but we cross these things all the time. Like there's loud shirts, there's sharp cheese. These are not. Right. These make no sense. Linguistically, they make no sense, but we all know what they mean, and that is a part of. That is a part of some sort of cross synesthesia type of action, maybe, where we're, you're trying to intuit anyone who's listened to good music. I mean, look at me and Buddy can sit there and listen to the same music. We have the same, very similar musical taste. We like hearing, beautiful melodic music. It just soothes us. But then I know friends of mine who just love heavy metal. You're a weirdo. No, I'm just kidding.
Can I mention something from a simple electrical point of view? So if you have a metal tuning fork, then I'm assuming it can conduct electricity. So it's like if you move a coil in a magnetic field, that's you get a generator. You get an interaction between the moving conductor and surrounding magnetic field. So if it's vibrating, then that interaction with the magnetic field is going to exert a force on it, which is going to impinge on the vibrating frequency. So it seems like there's kind of assuming there's an electromagnetic field, then it's not surprising that you get tonal interference.
Right.
Yeah, I assume that's all too elementary to have bothered saying, but anyway.
Well, no, one of the criticisms that I encounter fairly regularly is people say, well, how do you know it's not the Doppler effect? How do you know, when you're moving the fork around the body and it's changing, that it's not room acoustics and all of that? I'm like, well, don't you think that I would, of course, think that? You know what I mean? Like, that was my first thought, was that it was room acoustics, that it was, But what I found is that, yes, room acoustics and what people are wearing and how you're turning the fork all do influence the way that you're hearing it. And there is a distinct other signal going on as well that has shown itself, time and time and time again. You can have the same person wearing the same clothes and the same treatment table in the same room, and the fork is going to sound different around them every time because it's working in a different layer of the field and bringing up different kinds of information.
And that's really, you're not really you're using basically a sensor, which, via your I shouldn't say intuition, your knowledge, your sensory input. But this is actually, something that's been, talked about with, people who are really good at reading people, just cold reading or other things like that, where they can they're intuiting or but with their knowledge of what you're going to do, like shrugging your shoulders or crossing your legs or crossing your arms or your general attitudes and your facial expressions that you try to hide, that type of thing. So I can understand that real information can come through that just that alone. So to actually put a sensor inside a field and it would be, like we talked about before, ideal to be able to see the whole field in 3D. But this is a field just around the body. Plus, you have to understand that we are now surrounded by vibrating fields of electromagnetism, and as you've probably seen lots of videos, we really still don't know the full scope of what that means yet. And are we affecting ourselves? Is maybe that's why we're getting sick?
How do you visualize it in a compelling and useful way? That's
exactly.
That's the quest.
And but it's no one could deny the field exists. We know it's there. We know that our body interacts with the field of the Earth. We know the Earth has a field. We know that it vibrates and reacts with the field of the solar system and all of that, right up to wherever. So we're all immersed in literally layers of fields, and it brings me back to what Heather, when Heather talks about astrology, I keep on thinking of that. Like, well, okay, there's the other field going by over here, and here's this, here's the moon, and then of course the idea of lunatics, and so speak.
But then you start getting the 12, and you start getting these ancient proportions and sacred geometry out of it, and that one is to me just a wellspring. You start looking at it that way,
and this might be a way into that actually. Because this is we're trying to understand, or maybe even rebirth that technology. Hey, Mesmer.
Yeah. Mesmer, see? Mesmerizing.
He's it's ironic because the same debate, some of the same questions. I was just watching a TEDx talk with regards to hypnotism, because people go, hypnotism's not real, and then he shows you, and you're like, what? What's going on here? How is this happening? How can you do this to brains? What are you triggering? And it just shows how much we don't know.
And then what's the intention of it? This is where things start to get really dicey, because the intention of hypnotizing.
Oh, well,
that's
clearly, I'm not going to make a judgment. Obviously, we'll go, Eileen is clearly out to heal. Okay, you pass judgment.
I'll make one.
You pass judgment then.
I'm playing.
Of course.
But that thing. What is that thing? That I would intention. This theme has come up a lot. What's our intention? What's the nature of why we're doing something? What's the motivation? That thing.
Well, and of course, intention is one of those things that you can. One of those other things that we can almost feel, like when someone has a good intention towards you, generally speaking, unless they're really good at being a bugger,
Right.
And Dr. Becker, I like that book.
Very cool. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was really, really great. I think this was a beautiful, one of our most beautiful sessions. So thank you very much.
Oh, nice. Yeah, thank you. I always enjoy talking about
I always enjoy talking about this stuff with people who really get it, and who come from a framework where they can understand and give, good input about it.
Well,
Cool.
it's what we're always here to do.
You to join us again if you'd like. So we
Definitely.
And we're on whatever pathway we're on. It feels organic. Would you agree, Neil? I think it's organic.
It's organic and growing. People are well. We're talking to people like yourself, and most of the time they just see a presentation. And now here you are explaining things, asking questions, or answering questions that other people, obviously have had. And because the EU community already has somewhat of a grasp, even though we might not always agree on every single aspect, there is clearly a kindred spirit, perhaps. The desire to know truth, the desire to discover together. Each with our own little aspect of it, and that's something I found disconcerting and severely lacking in perhaps maybe modern science. I don't know if I want to say it just cruelly, because I don't want to paint the whole thing with a bad brush or anything. But
I'm unfortunately on the call here, so I got to run. But thanks again, and we're available. Check. Neil is available. I'm always available, and.
Well, you know what? I'd probably love to talk to you guys after I hang out with Monty and figure anything out.
Sure. Oh, that'd be great.
Definitely. Why don't you guys set it up for the another show then? Because I think wasn't it Dr. Claridge was on with us earlier with Philip Francis at the Bath conference.
Yeah, and that would be great to hear what you discovered.
If not, then
Mm-hmm. It's great, if anything. Yes.
Well, let's fingers crossed. Of course. I mean, I hope.
Yeah. Well, it'd be neat if we could. But I just know from the research I've done so far that it's never as simple and as easy as you want it to be.
Right.
So it's like, okay, well, next time we'll figure out this.
Well, I've been confronted with something that's like it's like so easy, but it has such an import to it. It becomes like amazingly hard, but because of the import of it,
Mm-hmm.
like a switch,
yeah,
like something that needs a toggle,
I agree.
Well, Heather, Robert, did you want to, or anyone else want to ask her a question before we call this day?
I have one question.
All right,
and that's how, if you're familiar with like how a sound wave or a shock front affects the electric field strength in a double layer. My question would be then, might that be the way that sound affects emotion? We know that there's neurotransmitters or hormones that bind electrically at the right sites, but those are double layers. So if the sound can change the strength of the electric field in the double layer, might that affect not what neurotransmitters or hormones are out there, but how they bind or don't bind at any given time?
No, that's a really interesting question, and I'm sure there's some kind of test for that. But it would be, we definitely influence the strength of the field. In places where it's weak, we help make it stronger. In places where it's too strong, we help kind of settle it down. And now it's got to have a biological component that's testable somehow.
Well, that's one I think is easier to see though in space. That's my areas, like the astronomical stuff, and in space where they see sound waves propagating in plasma, they know that there's an electric field that travels at the front of the shock wave at the speed of the shock wave, and the strength of it does depend on the strength of the electric field isn't proportional to the sound, basically.
Yeah, the amplitude. Well, and that brings the question to how do we, when we were talking about earlier about, breaking it down into infrared and microwave and sound and electricity, it's all vibration ultimately. And where do you draw the line between what we call electricity and what we call sound?
Right? That's something that's a question I have never found anybody to give me a really good answer.
That was really right. That was really compelling to me.
Yeah.
Especially when you start talking about
it's just very low. It's like the very low frequencies, like the frequencies that are here's a period that's 2 days long. Here's a period that's a year long. Here's a period that's 1,000 years long. And is that the same the material that's being going in this periodic undulation that light is?
Right.
This is a fascinating scalar kind of opening concept to me. It's that William Blake, open the doors of perception. You'll see everything as it is, infinite. That answer, and the answer is true. It seems true.
Right. Well, one of the things that I'm going to be doing to help to kind of answer this question about just the nature of electricity itself, because it's something we don't really even understand as far as I can tell, I'm going to be putting together a series of podcasts, and I'm going to be interviewing everybody that I can think of and that other people can let me know. So if you guys know anybody, please pass it on, who really knows electricity. So obviously Wall will be one of them, Dan Winter. I've got a short list already, and I'm going to be sending out invitations to these people. The name of the podcast is Think Electrically. And it will be for me to help to better understand questions like that, like the difference between what we call sound and what we call electricity. And because when you look at the conventional definitions of electricity in the standard model, it doesn't make any sense. It's contradictory. It's confusing.
Exactly.
Like we really need to revision and relanguage our whole understanding of vibration and sound and electricity and all that. Anyway, so I'm going to be kind of tackling that in earnest. So any suggestions for people for me to invite on that, I would be very welcome to hear.
Oh, great! We'll definitely put together a list for you. But awesome. What were you going to say? What was your question?
So, I'm I refer to it as when we were talking about frequencies and things like that and vibrations. I'm thinking of it more in a way of fractals, frequencies, and filaments, because how do these frequencies filament? Because that's really what it is they're filamenting, and they're fractal. So it's all hierarchical nested structures of helices within helices within helices. That's all helical. So I was just making a statement back there about when you start to visualize it this way, it allows you to get a good conception of what it is on a deeper level. Like Dan Winter so eloquently goes deep into the pine cones kissing noses and the helices and the cornucopia or the caduceus inside of these maps that I generate. That's really what's going on, and then that's ultimately Birkeland currents, what Birkeland currents are composed of. So
yeah, and DNA, right, from the largest scale, to the smallest.
Ultimately everything does that, and it's induction. It is induced, and it is entanglement is induction. And according to these maps that I've been generating and producing, I'm not sure if you're aware of Donald Scott, but if you want to put him on the list of people to talk to for sure, of course you know him or heard of him, and with the EU, with the EU. He's excited.
I have to say, Donald thinks that I don't have enough.
Oh, he doesn't what?
He thinks that I don't have enough science involved, and he's not very happy about Wall kind of bringing me into the fold. So that
you're working towards creating the language.
Yes, yeah. Part of my goal is to have the approval of Don Scott because I don't yet.
Okay.
Well, I can. That's a good goal. I really mean that.
Right,
reaching for. Go ahead.
Donald. well, maybe that's where we could smooth out the edges, because he approved strongly of my work, and maybe that's where our work is going to meliorate or mold together, because it really is, if you can start visualizing these vibrations, you'll have a somatic type of view. Like I sort of think what might be doing is syntactical, which is, if I could coin a phrase, like somatics and tactics, like you're feeling it, not only hearing it, but also feeling the bioplasma and the biolayer, electrical biofields.
There is a direct link between sound or vibration or compression and electromagnetism through piezoelectrics, straight up crystals, so to speak. And we are just discovering still new things about the human body. And this is a very, very complex mass of cells, and we're trying to figure out exactly what parts are influenced. We just recently learned, I think, that we have magnetic receptors somewhere. I didn't even know that we did.
In our brain.
Yeah, and
you have all
obviously,
kinds of magnetite in your brain.
exactly. That's just I didn't know that. It could explain a lot of things where people are subjected to high magnetic fields and become apparently terrorized or other things like that. They can be fear-inducing. What does that do? Is it moving charge? And this is what our body is sensing.
About the ability to speak, perhaps, like and understand the speech. What do you think that could be helpful?
Well, actually, I didn't really think of that.